So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. One of the things that you see when Paul, under the inspiration of God, gets to writing 2 Corinthians is it's almost a defense of his ministry and the apostles' ministry, the entire book. I mean, in 1 Corinthians, there is some exhortation of this is the way you should operate. This is some things you're having problems with. But when you get to 2 Corinthians, it's almost as if Paul had to take a step back and say, look, guys, this is who we are. And we come to you based on who we are, who God has called us. And we ask you, listen to what we're saying. And you almost get the sense that there was some serious trouble. We talk about prayer for our church. Well, this church definitely needed prayer, okay? And I say that because if you understand that context, it's important because that's the context in which Paul says these words in 2 Corinthians 4 in verses 16 to 18. And what he is essentially saying is, look, imitate us. Imitate us. And you say, well, aren't we supposed to imitate Jesus? Well, definitely. But here's what we got to understand. None of us have ever met Jesus. I mean, actually, that's what makes you an apostle, by the way, that you actually met Jesus, that you walked with Jesus, that you learned from Jesus. There were men in Acts chapter 6, there were men who were called to be basically deacons because the church was having some problems with the Greek-speaking widows. All of those men had the same qualifications as the apostles as far as holiness. The only difference is they had never seen Jesus. And Paul even says he's abnormally born because the way he saw Jesus was not in the flesh, but Jesus appeared to him in a very specific, on the road to Damascus. And in that sense, he had met Jesus. And that's what makes an apostle an apostle. They had seen Jesus. And what the apostles are essentially giving us in the scriptures is they're giving us their eyewitness testimony of what Jesus said and taught. Now, it's important because, again, none of us have met Jesus. In fact, the only way that you know Jesus is by the teaching of the apostles. We are reliant on the apostolic ministry to know Jesus. That's why the Bible's so important. Now, again, we know that supernaturally the Holy Spirit opens this up to us by renewing our souls. But apart from the apostolic ministry, we don't know Jesus. So we do know Jesus through the apostles and through their examples, because that's the purpose that Christ gave us. So truly, when the apostles are saying, listen to us, imitate us, they're saying something that even today matters. Imitate our example. And what is it about their example that we should imitate specifically based on what we see here? Well, one thing we should imitate is their belief in the power of the gospel. It's, I don't know, I guess it's been a long time since I sat and watched a full football game. When I was up in New York, I loved the New York Giants, and I used to watch football. And up in the Northeast, college football, people don't really do that much there. But it's NFL and But down here, I know college and high school football is big. But one thing about football that you got to understand, if you understand anything about football, that football is important. I have seen guys risk their livelihood and their life and their limb just to get that ball across the goal. I saw one guy jump, and I said, man, you got 300-pound back people that will land on you and crush your arm and every joint you have, and you're extending yourself out just to get that football to a certain point. Well, the thing to understand is the apostles, when it comes to the gospel, it mattered to them. The gospel is important. In fact, if you look at 2 Corinthians in the next chapter, in chapter 5, these words are powerful when Paul writes in chapter 5, beginning at verse 18, he says, All that he's been saying is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That is a great encapsulation of what the gospel message is. God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us in order that we might become the righteousness of God. That was all important. One way we should imitate the apostles is in believing in the power of the gospel. And what do I mean by the power of the gospel? Well, look, what I mean is simply this. I think this is something that happens to most people as they grow older. They realize that so much in their life didn't matter. I am 2 weeks away from going from, I was speaking to my daughter, we were driving the other day, and it's like I'm 2 weeks away from going from 0 to 60. It's not even like I'm going to get into an on-ramp and kind of cruise up 30, 40, 50, 60. I am going to be dropped and go 0 to 60 just like that. I don't know if Bill told you, but I was accepted into a chaplain's residency program at CHI Memorial. And I just kind of, when I went there, I was just going to take some classes and maybe think about moving toward being a chaplain because some of the things I'd experienced. They called me up, they gave me a full-time residency. It's like being a doctor. So I'm going from 0 to 60 real fast. And the reason I bring that up is because I imagine I'm going to be dealing with dying and sick people a lot. In fact, you notice that I don't have a beard. I used to have a beard. I came to and say, who is that man walking into this church? I know most of my family have said, oh, no, you got to grow something back, at least grow a mustache back. Well, I have to shave it because they fit me for a respirator. And I can't have a beard. That's how serious this is. That really came home to me. They even sprayed something in this. They put this thing over my head and sprayed something in there so I could say, if you smell something, then this is what COVID would be. And that's kind of scary, you know? But I say that because as we grow older, we start to realize so much what matters. And I think as we grow older, I hope as you grow older, that what really matters is the fact that you are right with the God that you will one day meet, maybe very soon. And it doesn't matter whether you're older or younger. You could meet God tomorrow. But we have to reckon with God. All of us, everyone. The problem with the evangelism and people is not that they don't believe in God or and that they don't know God. And the problem is deep down in every single human's heart, they don't want to believe in God. That's the real issue, because there's fear. When you really think about it, it's nice if you mold Jesus or God into a form where he's nice and he plays golf with you and gives you what you want. But if you're really honest about yourself and you think if God is really God, then that can't be God. One classic rock group said, Jesus is just all right with me. Well, if you really think about it, God being God, there's a transcendence, and one of the things I think everybody realizes, there's something, I'm not right. I just feel there's something wrong. I think everyone knows that. Paul dealt with that when he went to Corinth or went to Athens and he saw all these gods. Why do they have all these gods? Why do people do that? Because they know that there's something not right. And the gospel is the solution to that feeling, to that realization. Because in the gospel, you can be right with this God. Whether you feel right with God, according to the promises of this word in the gospel is there's someone who can become sin for you. It's not like you have to get cleaned up. It's not like I have to get myself. No, right here and now, there is someone who can become sin for you in order that you might become the righteousness of God. And regardless of what you've been through, regardless of what you're going through, regardless of how deep in prison you are or deep you are on the street, you can be right with God right now. And even though you trip and fall up, You say, well, I messed up. I knew a friend said, I messed up, so that's why I stopped being a Christian. You don't get it. It never was about you. It was about this person who became sin for you in order that you might become the righteousness of God. It's always that way, even when you mess up. And that is power. I mean, Paul, he realized what he had been doing, what he was. He realized that his zealousness was nothing. He had been killing Christians, killing God's people. And there are people throughout ages who have realized this. I think it was either Isaac Newton or Isaac Watts. I forget. I get them mixed up all the time. But the person, I think, was a slave trader. And according to one account of this person, after he's a Christian, there were days when he would still be on the floor as a monk, scrubbing the floor because of his sin, saying, I've got to scrub it out. But God, the gospel says you can be right with God, not because of what you do, but because there's someone, Jesus Christ, who has the ability and the attention to become sin for you so you become the righteousness of God. This is what the apostles struggled for. This is what they meant when they said, this is the ministry we implore you, be reconciled to God. That's how we have to be like the apostles. Understand the power of the gospel. Pray to God that he would show you how powerful this gospel is. Another thing is to imitate the apostles in being ready and willing to suffer for the gospel. I mean, if it is as powerful as it is, it's worth suffering for. It's worth, when you're in a situation where one of the disasters in my life is that I rode with a man when I was teaching in Louisiana, and I was teaching at Farmerville High School, and I taught there for 4 years, and I rode with the man for 4 years. It was a 45-minute drive each way, and I rode with this man for 4 years and never said anything about the gospel to him. And then about 6 years later, I looked him up, found he had died of a heart attack. That is a tragedy of my life. And why didn't I say anything? Because the same reason why you probably might not say anything. Because it's kind of like, corny. It's kind of like, but you should. You should suffer. You should be inconvenienced. These men were inconvenienced. In fact, one of the things you look at, if you look at 2 Corinthians, if you go to chapter 1, they talk about the affliction they suffered. They talk about, for we do not want you to be in 2 Corinthians in chapter 1. And they're talking about their experience. Again, they're laying this out for the Corinthians. They said, for we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despised of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. What do you think happened? What happened there when they were in Asia? Well, it was a situation where they were in a city, and people thought they were maligning their idols. And essentially the whole city rose up against the apostles and were saying, Ephesus for Artemis. And they just yelled it, Ephesus for, and we're talking thousands of people. It was so bad that they wouldn't even let Paul go outside. They're like, you need to stay in here, Paul, because if you go out, they'll tear you apart. That's scary. But they said, we did this for the gospel. In fact, when you go back to our passage, just above our passage, this is what they say in verse 9 of chapter 4. They say, or in verse 7 of chapter 4, they say, we have the treasures of the gospel in jars of clay. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body of the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life is at work. That was their commitment to suffer. And we need to have that same commitment, to be inconvenienced. Perhaps God hasn't called you to it, but maybe he will. Maybe he should, that you would be inconvenienced. I would even argue that there are some right now who are inconvenienced by just having a commitment to this church. I'm sure it would be easy to say, oh man, I'd rather go somewhere else. But you have a commitment, and that might cost you. Even if it's just getting up those stairs back there. I know that can be difficult for some people, I can imagine. But the fact is, be willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of the gospel. Imitate them because it's worth it. And pray that God would show you the power of the gospel so you would say, I am willing to be inconvenienced. But there's another important way that we should imitate the apostles. We should imitate the apostles by being ready and willing to be knocked down, but not counted out for the gospel. Again, in that passage that we just saw, notice he said, it's a wonderful passage in applying to your own experience. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. It's a dichotomy. Maybe you felt that. I'm beat down, but I'm not destroyed. In Lamentations, Jeremiah says something like that in Jeremiah 3 when he says, because of God's mercies are new every day. And in the King James Version, it says, because of his mercies, we are not consumed. How do you know that God loves you, even though your life is just messed up, even though you're struggling with the things that people struggle with, real things that people worry about? You're still loving Jesus. You're not consumed. Understand that in many ways we get knocked down. But be willing to be knocked down, but not counted out for the sake of the gospel. And that's what this passage is about here. It says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. Some of y'all feel that your outer self is wasting away? I just started taking 2 vitamins. I used to walk through Costco, and I looked at all this stuff in Costco. What is this stuff? The joint medicines and stuff. It's over if you've ever been to Costco, it's over on this side of Costco. Got the joint medicine. I'm like, I used to walk through there maybe 10 years, but now I walk through and say, oh, man, I wonder if this will help. I wonder if that will help. I started taking turmeric. I started taking this other thing, and it really has helped me because I was waking up. I mean, it gets to the point as you get older where when you're young, you jump out of bed, I'm ready to go. But as you get older, you say, oh, hoping I get out of bed this time, my back doesn't lock out. I hope when I get out of bed, I hope I'm able to walk, and for a little while you're wondering, hope this goes away in the next 5 minutes or so. But that's the way, it's almost like you feel you're wasting away. Well, when it comes to being a Christian and walking faithfully, as God calls you to be inconvenienced by the gospel, it's going to seem, because it's, a lot of times you think you should get rewarded. You witness somebody, I should get a reward here. God should love me. I should get something special. A lot of times you don't. In fact, it gets worse. And Jesus even testified that those of his people that are fruitful, he prunes in order to make them fruitful. It doesn't say he rewards them. Well, there is reward, but maybe not now. But there you can be sure you will be pruned because God wants you to be more fruitful. And I never knew a plant that liked to be pruned. You understand? Point is, it says, don't lose heart. Though we are wasting away, inside we're being renewed day by day. In a sense, think about it this way. If you are a believer in Jesus, you are actually called to be knocked down that way. You are called to it. I know it's not a popular message, but it is true. In fact, Paul says it in so many words. It says it clearly in Philippians 1 and verse 29. Philippians 1 verse 20, he says, for it has been granted. This is what you've been granted. You've been given this. You've been granted this privilege. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. You believe that? God has given you the wonderful privilege and granted you the privilege of suffering for him. Yay. Did that make you happy? Well, that's the thing about being a Christian. God has told you this in advance. As we are wasting away because of our commitments to Christ, why am I not getting reward? I mean, look, I have dealt with guys who, if they get out of prison, they could get out of prison within a week. They can make $10,000 a week, easily. And these are guys who have to get out of prison, and they will be very blessed if they get a job at McDonald's. But now, any of these guys that I know, they could make $10,000 a week if they want. They know how to. They have the resources. All of their connects are still there. But they make a decision because of their commitment to Jesus, I'm going to work at McDonald's. If I can even get that job. You know how demeaning that can be when you know you could be making big money in Atlanta? Well, that is being inconvenienced for the gospel. And working in McDonald's might be, you might be happy and say, yay, for the first week. But then you're working for somebody who's younger than you and they're telling you what to do. Or someone who's just plain out dumber than you and they're telling you what to do. Mopping floors and cleaning out bathrooms. That's inconvenient. But you do it. But the gospel tells me this is what my Lord wants, to draw near to my God because I've been made right, to experience that because you're right with God. If you chose not to do it, because of your standing with Jesus, you will never be closer to God than you are now. It's your experience of that closeness that you want. And for that experience, I will do what the gospel, I will do what God calls me to do because the gospel tells me I'm right with him. I want to please him. I don't have to do this. Well, I have to do it because I know God will be pleased if I do it. It's not that I'll be saved if I do it. He'll be pleased. But they say, and then you are inconvenienced by the gospel. And many times it will feel like you are wasting away. Again, God has said it has been granted to you not only to believe, but to suffer for his sake. In fact, God has not only called you to that suffering, he has decreed it. Think about this. It says in Genesis 3:15, there's a word for that in theology, right? It's called the proto-evangelium. It's a first preaching of the gospel. Genesis 3:15, it says, God said to Adam, what's wrong? What'd you do? Adam said, that woman over there made me do what I did. He said, okay, Eve, what did you? That serpent over there made. Notice he didn't even talk to the serpent. Didn't even ask, what'd you do, serpent? No, he just immediately went to laying down what he was going to say. And this is what he said. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. What does that mean? What it means is that Satan has the right, as the old people used to say in the old country, Satan has spanking rights. God has told us that Satan is going to bruise our heel. I know at some point before I start working this full-time mission of mine, I got to get out there and take care of my backyard, which is totally overgrown. And I'm pretty sure there's some snakes out there. So I got to wear these big old garters because I don't know, they'll hit your heel. And I've never been bit by a snake and don't want to. So I got to wear these big old garter things so that doesn't happen. Well, that's Satan bruises your heel. He strikes your heel. He has full privilege to do that. We see him do that in Job, where God says, have you considered my servant Job? He says, well, let me at him. He says, okay, he's yours. Go at it. When Peter thinks he's all that, Jesus looks at Peter and says, Satan has asked me for the privilege to sift you. And Jesus didn't say to Peter, and I said, no, he didn't say that. He said, and when you return, bless your brother. You understand that God does this? He says this is decree because the sad thing about Satan is even his worst efforts in the lives of God's people are used to make us better. Because though we are wasting away, we are being renewed inside. Our outsides may be wasting away, but inside we're being renewed. Because, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. As the Joker said, it also might make you weirder, but it definitely makes you stronger. And whatever he does to a believer, it's only going to make us stronger. So God says, have at it because I know that this trial is going to. God uses that. Satan is the quintessential drug addict. And the reason being is because whatever he does can't work and he knows it, but he still does it. And God says, this is what I have decreed, that he will bruise your heel. But notice this. The offspring of the woman will crush his head. What would you rather? Someone kick you in the foot, or knock you in the head? Because when he knocks you in the head, that's lights out. God says your offspring, will crush his head. He will bruise your heel, but you will crush his head. And that's what Jesus did. He crushed the head of the serpent. But that reality is there for us, and we've got to understand that this is part of our wasting away, is that it's part of the Christian's life. We waste away. The gospel and our commitment to the gospel oftentimes diminishes us in this world, that is. While inside we are renewed. And how are we renewed? We are renewed because when we are knocked down, we become stronger. Psalm 119:67 says, before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. Can you say that about God? Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I can. A little further down in verse 71 of the same Psalm 119, it says, it is good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes. Let me ask you a very basic question. When have you learned the most and drew near to God? Was it in those nice times when you woke up in the morning and got yourself a nice cup of coffee and sat down with the sun shining through your door or in your window and just read the Bible for an hour? Is that when you grew the most, or was it when God put you in it and you were down in it and you were suffering, and in the midst of that suffering you were looking to God saying, God, when did you grow the most? You know the answer to that. That is the bad condition of our hearts because we're sinners. We need to be afflicted, unfortunately. God does that. Now, affliction is, we're not masochists. We're not like, okay, well, I just look forward. I don't look forward to any affliction. I don't wish it on anybody. Because God has promised us joy. Our goal is joy and glory in the gospel. But for the Christian, the pathway is through the cross. It's always through the cross. And Satan's word to you is, you don't have to suffer. You want to understand the temptations of Jesus in Matthew 4 and Luke 4? It's simply this: you don't have to suffer. If anybody tells you that in your walk with Christ, if any teacher tells you that, you know what? You don't have to suffer. Now, it's one thing if you need medication or something. We're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who says, you know what, you may be poor, you may need a job. Well, you don't have to suffer. There's ways to get around that. Run. Look to the Lord to provide for you. And it may be through the cross. Through the cross. Because it was good to be afflicted that I might learn your word. You know, Paul, again, as an apostle, gives us a stunning testimony to this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, this is what Paul says. He says, beginning at verse 7, he says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelation that God was giving me, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly for my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When you are wasting away on the outside, it's then on the inside that you're renewed, and then it's you're strong. Do you understand that principle? That is a gospel principle. For the sake of the gospel, don't be prepared and be willing to suffer for God and for the gospel. Be prepared to waste away if necessary. You know, one of the things God has taught me in the last 4 years is he's taught me to be comfortable with the discomfort of being with him alone. Because it really is uncomfortable to be with God alone. What do I mean? Many times I would love to be around people. I would love to have people saying, hey, Pastor Jackson, that was a great sermon you did. Hey, Pastor Jackson, that's a great thing you did. Hey, man, you want to come over to the house? I'd love that. But I have to say no to some of those things because what comes with them is something that draws me away from the gospel. And in saying no, I have to say, God is my friend, more so than that person. That's hard. That's why it's uncomfortable sometimes to be alone with God. I've been growing comfortable with the discomfort of being alone with God. That comes from, by the way, the Navy SEALs, because one of the things you have to learn as a Navy SEALs is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. As Christians, we have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with being alone with God, and it can be very uncomfortable. But you develop a taste for it because you understand how you're being renewed inside. In fact, back to our passage, that's what Paul says here when he says in verse when he says back in our passage in verse 17, he says, excuse me, I was in the wrong chapter. He says, I was actually in the right chapter. Look at this. Okay. He says in verse 17, for this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. You have that perspective. We know that we're prepared to be knocked down because not being knocked down makes us stronger. But we also have to understand the things that knock us down over time only make it harder to count us out permanently. The more you resist, the more you are knocked down and get back up, the harder it's going to be to knock you down. All of this builds you up in the faith when you persevere. You know, one of the things I honestly, I really do believe that the Lord prepared me for the position I'm going. Because if you had asked me 4 years ago if I want to be a chaplain, I would say, no, I don't think so. Why? Because the preaching is where it's at. You know, getting up and preaching to people and doing it, you know, that's the fun of the ministry. Not caring for sick people, not caring for dying people, not being face to face with. And I still think that one of the things I'm going to have a hard time dealing with is children's oncology. But I guess that's what I'm going to have to do. But that's not fun. That's not glamorous. That's not, you know, that's why I really think that this program is ranger training for pastors. Because it's not glamorous to care for people, but as a pastor, that's what you do. It's not glamorous. It's all wonderful. You have a church with 50,000 people and, you know, you get up and you don't have to worry about your income or anything. It's not glamorous when God calls you in the trenches to minister one-on-one with sick and hurting people. But that's what God is calling. That's part of the gospel and gospel training. And the thing is, light and momentary afflictions, the more God worked on me and worked on my thinking about this, I got to the point where I said, I think I want to do that. And it was hard. I think one of the biggest experiences that led me to a desire to do this is having to deal with my parents when they both were dying of COVID. It was hard. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But the point is, God, I'm not saying that in a delightful way, oh, God used it. But God did use it to bring me to a point where I can comfort people with the same comfort he gave me. In fact, that's all this is about. That's all this is about being a Christian. It's almost as if God puts a blanket on you. And because you realize it's God has done it, you want to throw that blanket on other people. You want to throw that blanket on other people. Because the reality is that these troubles we face, they are momentary. They will be gone one day. Like I tell my guys, I told my guys sometime when I was in prison, I told them straight, there will come a day when you will not be incarcerated. We hope that day will come soon. But if it doesn't, there will be a day when you will not be incarcerated. There will be a day when you won't have to worry about your hip hurting or your back hurting. There will be a day when you won't have to worry about the fact that you got more month than money in the bank. There will be a day when all of these light and moment will be gone. But even now, you are preparing yourself for that day so that as these things happen, they don't get to you as much because you don't get counted out. You don't end up taking a bad path or just fretting so much that you just become a worration to everybody else around you. You actually smile. You have joy, even though you have a lot not to be joyful about. You may be knocked down, but because of these light and momentary troubles, you are being strengthened and receiving a glory that far surpasses the others. In fact, Peter really talks about this in 1 Peter in chapter 1 and verse 6 to 7, in verse 6 to 7, and 1 Peter 1, 6 to 7, when he says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, If necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's almost as if we're all swords. If you know about making a sword, you put it in that fire and just bang it, boom, boom, and then put it in that fire. It's like, imagine that's what God's, He's looking at our souls and he puts us in that fire and bang, bang, and it hurts. But what comes out is precious gold. All the dross gone, precious gold. That's what God is doing to you with these light and momentary troubles. What God is giving you is something that far outweighs him. And that's what we have to understand, because ultimately the thing that we have to rejoice in is what Peter says next in verse 8 to 9. He says, though you've not seen Jesus, you love him. And though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Do you realize that as you grow in Jesus, you are being made for heaven? There are so many people that think they'll enjoy heaven. They won't. Because heaven is an ultimate, all-day palooza fest worshiping God. That's what it is. And if you don't enjoy worshiping God now, you ain't going to enjoy heaven. But that's the point. God is making you. He's molding you so that there will come a day when you will absolutely enjoy that. And he's churning, and not only is Jesus making a place for you in that mansion, he is making you fit for that mansion through those light and momentary troubles. You are becoming a new creation that can never be counted out. Won't it be wonderful as you grow? And I think some of you can realize this. There are things that used to plague, if you're a Christian of any years, there are things that used to plague you that no longer plague you. I think that things that used to plague me, I think about, I used to get really mad at people who would like that would have a problem with Jesus, and like I would be in a place and it'd be like I had these guys who were 5%ers, and I get so mad. It's like, man, I'm just going to show them. I really don't care now. I mean, I'll share the gospel with you, but if you want to argue, go ahead and argue. I just ain't got time for it, you know? It's just these things don't bother me anymore. I can name a bunch of other things. It surprises me now where I'll be watching these short videos, TikTok videos, and so many of these videos have, very, very questionable stuff, stuff that spurs lust. And I'm just, quite frankly, I ain't got time for it. Now, that is a huge achievement for somebody who has really struggled with an addiction to pornography for most of their life. It's just I don't have time. It's not bragging about it. It's just the Lord has molded me through pain, through suffering, where that's just not an issue. Maybe your issue was anger. He just said, I'm not going to deal with it. I remember one guy, he used to have a problem beating his wife. And then he went to rehab, and he had a counselor, and somebody was guiding him. And then he was able to, his wife said she would see him again. And while they were with each other, his wife just got mad, which she should, because she dealt with a lot of stuff. And she started hitting him and saying, why did you do this to me? And he got so crazy in the head, he walked away, and he called his sponsor up and said, this is what she was doing, and I just wanted to crush her. And the sponsor said, well, what did you do? I just walked away. Well, there you go. That's victory. That's what God is doing. But see, one thing you got to get, and I'm going to close with this because our text closes with this. As Paul says here, he says in verse 18, we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. One thing that you can guarantee is you and others and you will see the bad things about yourself. You will see the things that make you say to yourself, why am I following this gospel? Why am I drawing near to God? I draw near to God, but this happens to me. That's very clear. One thing Satan will show you is he will put everything on the table like he did with Jesus when he took Jesus to the mountain and said, all these kingdoms I will give you, and they're mine to give you. In that instance, that's one area where Satan did not lie. For a time, they are his to give Jesus. And one of the things Satan will do is he will show you everything you're going to get. Or conversely, he will show you what's going to happen to you if you follow Jesus. It's sort of like if anybody ever see that Return of the Jedi? Anybody who saw Return of the Jedi, raise your hand. Remember that scene where Luke Skywalker, he's in there and the Emperor's sitting up, the Emperor's saying, and your friends are going to die. And you're going to be defeated. He just kept saying it over and over again. And your friends. That's what Satan does to you. Oh, you'll never get past this. You know, as far as someone, the Lord has blessed me with discipline of the Spirit to lose the weight I've lost. One of the hardest things is getting on that scale every day because the scale goes, ooh, ooh. One day you're this way, one day you're that way. And you're like, why am I doing this? But just stay with it because it's what's unseen that matters. What God is doing in you is so much more valuable than what is going on around you. Because we fix our eyes on that which is not seen, the fact that God is, and how do we do it? By trusting in his promises. God promises that he's going to sanctify. He promises that he's going to provide for you. I mean, one of the things that we struggled with in our household was we thought the Lord was moving us to the next step at one point. We thought the Lord had given us a wonderful opportunity to actually move where we'd have so much better as far as a job. And it's like he offered it to us, but then he took it away. And we're like, well, he didn't take it. We made a decision not to do it because it didn't work. The doorway was open, but we couldn't do it because it wasn't right, even though we wanted so bad to do it. And we're like, why did this happen, God? And the thing I was worried about is not that I would stop thinking that God loved me, but I would start thinking that God doesn't love me as much as I thought he did. And now we understand that God is saying, hey, I still had work. I had work to do before we go anywhere. We didn't know that. But you look to the things that are unseen. What is God doing? What do you know by his promises? He wants to make you into something. Perhaps he has given you time, alone time where you're not responsible to a 9 to 5, so you can spend time drawing near to him. Perhaps he's taken friends from you so you can spend time drawing near to him. Perhaps he's made it so that there's so many things he does, you can think, oh, why is this happening to me? What's the upside? What is the unseen thing that God is doing? We got to look to that which is not seen. Satan will show you everything that you are or not going to get. God doesn't work that way. God just says, follow me, follow me, follow me. Trust in the unseen reality of my promises and follow me. And so that's what we do. And why do we do it? Because of the gospel, as 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21 says, God has made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, in order that we might become the righteousness of God. That's what God has done. That's why we struggle, because God himself has made a doorway to draw us near to him. We struggle not to get near to him because we are as close to him as far as our standing as we'll ever get. What do I mean? Well, all of my kids will be Jacksons. No matter how much they make me mad or how much they make me happy, they'll still be Jacksons. And if you are in Christ, you will still be in Christ. But it's your experience of that. In fact, let me close with these words from Paul, because this is how Paul says it. He says in Philippians 3 and verse 10 to 11, he says, I want to know Jesus and the power of his resurrection, that I may share in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. Is Paul saying that by suffering he can earn his way to the resurrection from the dead? That's not what he's saying. He knows he's already saved. We see that in his other words, in his other letters. What he's saying is, I want to experience that salvation. I want to feel that salvation. Every day I want to walk in that salvation, so I can experience the fact that I am even now being resurrected from the dead. And that's what God calls you to draw near to him. So I tell you, brothers and sisters, today, don't be ashamed of the gospel. Find power in the gospel, because in the gospel you're right with God. And be willing to be knocked down and know that you won't be counted out in Jesus. Be knocked down, but don't be counted out. Strive for him and don't give up or lose heart.